Hi there, and thank you for tuning in to The Social Circus, where every week we dive into a variety of topics covering social media, mindset, and how to run your business. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Hello, my lovely listeners, and welcome to another episode of The Social Circus. I am your host, Sarah Thomason, and today I am thrilled to be joined by the fabulous Annie Gashuru, who is a racial equity coach. And just as a little heads up for you all before Annie introduces herself, this is actually the second time she has come on my podcast. So I am incredibly privileged to have such a powerhouse woman come and speak to you all. And today we're going to be diving into the really juicy topic of AI and diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So welcome, Annie.
Thank you so much for having me back, Sarah. It's not every day you get invited back to do another podcast episode. So I am thrilled and the honor is all mine.
Oh, bless you. So for anyone who maybe hasn't heard of you, who's been living under a rock, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what is a racial equity coach? Because I have to be honest, before I met you, I wasn't aware of what it was either.
So first and foremost, I'm a mom to two incredible kids, and I am a wife and a racial equity coach. And simply what that means is that I teach online business owners and now getting into the corporate space as well, how to build businesses that are racially equitable so they can be intentionally inclusive, because inclusivity is not just something that we can assume we are. And a lot of my ideal clients who come on board, initially at the beginning of their journey, they're like, oh, I'm inclusive. I'm one of the good ones, matters to do with race. I have friends from different racial backgrounds and ethnicities. I'm cool. I really don't need this. But when you begin to understand the ways in which exclusivity exists and the ways in which we have been programmed to be biased and have prejudices and stereotypes against other things, and AI will come into play. We will touch on that of course. You begin to realize that you're not as inclusive as you think you are, and that's why it's about being intentional. And so that's what I do. I love it because it touches on not just our businesses, but our lives as humans, first and foremost. And it's something that we really cannot do without. Once you begin to understand the role of inclusivity, it is not something that you can just wish away or just think that you are. It is part and parcel of how we do life and business.
What a beautiful introduction, Annie. I could listen to you talk all day, and I absolutely love what it is that you do. And I'm so thrilled that you mentioned being a wife and a mother, because I think one of the big driving forces for the way in which we walk through the world is particularly to show the people around us this is how we should behave. And for me, it would be my sons to say, this is how I want you to walk through the world, and the world is better now than it was. And I was actually having a conversation with my husband last night about when we see racism, and I said that older generation have a tiny excuse for being racist because they often don't know better. But my generation and below, we know better and we want to do better. And it's wonderful that people like you are in the world to help guide us, because I'm that person who thinks that I'm doing okay. And I know that if you were even probably to just glance your eyes over my website, you would tell me otherwise. So what Annie does in the world is really important for us as business owners. But today, and I would encourage you to go back and listen to the past episode I did with Annie, because we talk a lot about that, and I'll pop the link in the show notes. But today I want to dive into a really interesting topic. Now, Annie and I were just having a little Facebook chat back and forward, and I mentioned to her as a passing comment that was she aware that AI is not inclusive, it lacks diversity. And I gave her a few examples of this, and she threw it back at me and said, would I come on her podcast to talk about this? And I said, no, because I'm not enough of an expert. And it kind of little spark in you, didn't it, Annie?
Yes, it did. And I think this really just planted the seed, because you're not the only one who had mentioned this. I had a few people mention it, in passing, particularly when ChatGPT kind of hit the scene for us in the online coaching space. I had some copywriters saying, oh, Annie, it would be good to get your input on this. And I'm like, AI is so foreign to me. It's not something that I'm still learning about it. But when you mention it, I think it was how you said it. And you just said, we need to understand how this will impact our businesses and the research that you had been doing. And I thought, you know what, I'll take a deep dive and I'll begin to educate myself. And so I went on this journey and I discovered so much about AI bias that it's something that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And it is important for us to share those findings. And for me, I would say, as I was doing this research, it took me back to when I began using, my phone and filters and getting on stories. And there were certain filters, Sarah, that wouldn't recognize my face. It would just come up with like a black circle. And I'd be like, oh, but my friend is able to use that filter. And I wanted to see how it would look on me and perhaps just give me that more confident feeling when I am, getting online, going live. Uh, but what I didn't know back then was that it couldn't pick up my face because I have a black face. I'm a black woman. And so it was with looking back now and going like, oh, that was a digital bias from the algorithm that it couldn't recognize me because how it has been built to recognize people who have a certain type of skin color, and mine did not meet that category. And so, and in other things that I've been able to go back and see, oh my goodness, this has been biased based on what AI is learning and who it is learning from, whatever data sets are being inputted, whatever learning that it's being fed, it will continue to be biased based on whoever is feeding it. And as we know, majority of the people who have access to this, the people who are creating these models and tools that we are using, predominantly come from maybe those who are affluent, maybe those who are white, and not. And maybe it hasn't even been done deliberately, Sarah. What about you? Assuming that you're creating this tool, but you don't know what negative impact it is having. For example, that filter, the person who created it may not know that this is the impact it is having on me as a Black person, but it is.
Yes. And I don't whilst it's really kind of you to say that, it's not okay. It's not okay that a filter doesn't recognize you, and it's not okay that AI doesn't do that. So let's kind of start with, because the reason I had a spark in it was I delivered a keynote last year on AI, and one of the things I really wanted to talk about was bias, because I was delivering it to a university and it was so much more progressive and they were always keen to hear this. And I was kind of devastated because I feel like I'm a 50-something-year-old woman, and I was raised by a single mother who's a staunch feminist. My mum is such a feminist, and I am as well. And from when I was a child, my mum was one of the sort of 4 leaders in her church to push for language to become he, she, and use both male and female. And so I was raised in that kind of household. And so from just a completely gender perspective, the way in which AI was approaching things was horrendous. And in the early days, we saw, I think I mentioned, if you asked for a doctor and a nurse, it would make the doctor a male, and it would always give it a white male name. Like my children's names, like Matthew and James, very white Anglo-Saxon, and that's okay because I am that. And then the nurse would be a female, and more often than not, it would give it an African American name, and because that's a lesser qualified thing, and that leans into all sorts of horrendousness. So can I just ask you, and if you don't mind sharing, when you first heard about this, but as someone who is a champion, how did it make you feel?
It just made me feel like, oh, we have an added barrier. Like, this is something new that I hadn't looked at or thought of in this way. It's an added barrier. But as I've dug further into it and sat with it, and I did an episode called The Errors of Racism, like how has racism evolved, you will find that when you get to the current era that we are living in, is that it is an AI era, and AI is the new way in which racism is being perpetuated because we are bringing things that are from historically excluded material and how life was done, and now it has been packaged into AI and it is invisible. Because the people who have created this, we don't know who they are. We are using these tools, but they are feeding us this stereotypical, this prejudiced views that sometimes we don't even realize. But if you're, how you're gendered, you'll go like, hey, hang on, this, you have to really take your time to be intentional, because if you're just doing some quick creating content, generative AI, using it in that way, you'll just quickly use that and take it without thinking. And so for those who don't want to take the time to think and sit with something, you will easily take that on, and it is scary and dangerous to think about.
It is so terrifying. And I think one of the things that you really touched on is that in the world right now, and this is not a political podcast, but let's be honest, people like Donald Trump are doing horrendous things for so many minority groups. And in Australia, we're seeing that trumpet party coming forward and trying to replicate that awful conduct that I believe we in Australia should not accept, and we do not accept. And that's really blatant, and it's really in our face, and it's really easy to go, oh my gosh, have you seen what Trump's done today? And in relation to, my goodness, just choose an issue. It's really in our face, and it's really apparent. And it's really easy for someone like myself who thinks that I am, as you said, a decent person, for me to go, that's terrible, I'm not opting into that. But what is harder is the fact that I'm using AI. I use it every day in my business, and I had no awareness, potentially, that these problems exist. And that's the terrifying thing, because it then becomes insidious. We're not aware that we're actually turning back the clock about 50 years in some of the ways in which AI is generating information. And I think that's really why I wanted to have a conversation with you today, is because I think most people who use AI don't realize this is what's going on. So can we talk about where it starts? Because it starts with the people who are creating AI. And let's be honest, like you said, it's the same as a filter. They didn't intend to create a tool that did this, but they are traditionally, in Silicon Valley, young white males. And so let's talk about what happens when we have one group creating how do we call it, a platform for everyone, because that's a problem in any group, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. And when you think about it, who are the decision makers? Who are the people who are deciding this is how we should live? These are the rules, these are the policies. Who is seated at that table? Many times it is people who create a world that works for them, and not necessarily those who are not at the table. So when a system or an institution is built, for example, an organization, who built it? And who did they have in mind when they built it? Because more often than not, those who are not at the table are not taken into consideration. So even going beyond race, matters to do with those with disabilities. If we build structures and put them in place and they're not inclusive of people who may not be able to use them, then we have unintentionally or intentionally left an entire group of people, just because the decision makers, the people who are seated at the table, are not diverse. They don't represent the different groups. And I think that's where we need to go back to: who are the creators? Who are the decision makers? And how do we get to the point where we're doing these things are being created in an ethical way, that we're taking into account how can this be created with integrity? Yes, I know there will be loopholes and it'll take us a while to get there, but I think we need to get to the baseline of who is setting this up, and is there like a body that they need to go through? Like when you're creating something and putting it together, does it go through some kind of mechanism where it is measured against some form of integrity? And so much so for inclusion, because even when you look at the justice system back in the United States, now they're using machines and they're picking up on, people who might have misdemeanors. The system is already so biased. And a lot of the times when there's misidentification, a lot of the times, people in law enforcement will go like, oh, that wasn't us as humans, that that was the machines. But how did the machines learn that? There's something in the machine that is causing it to pick people who have historically been oppressed and excluded.
And face face trouble in terms of the justice system at a higher rate than what they're represented in society. Black Americans are far disadvantaged in the legal system.
Absolutely. And so when the machine picks up on that, even though you try and remove the ethnicity, remove the fact that we don't want to disclose a background, somehow the machine is so smart, they're still able to pick up and still discriminate based on race. How is that possible? Even the people who have created these algorithms are still struggling to understand how. And that is where it becomes a little bit alarming, because if the creators themselves are struggling to understand how the machines are getting so smart that they're still able to pick up on this, what are we missing? What don't we know that they know?
And I love all the questions you're posing, Annie, and I really hope for my listeners this is really causing you to pause and think about it, because we as individuals are somewhat, we're not powerless, but we don't have much power, not sitting at those tables. But what we can start to do is be aware of them and have an understanding of what this looks and feels like. So one of the things you mentioned is, and having been someone who's done a lot of academic studies, all universities have ethics committees and those kind of approvals, and I'm absolutely confident, unfortunately, now in this Trump era, we're not going to see that happen. And most AI comes out of America. And so, what do we need to be thinking about? So let's talk about what we could be doing here in Australia, maybe talking to our governments and things like that. What should we be thinking about? And how can we, as a single person, try and enact some change?
I think it's just bringing it back to the basics. As you're using AI, you're not, and I heard this from one of the podcasts I was listening to, using it not necessarily as a teacher, but more as a tool. A tool that is there to assist you rather than you learning from it.
Mm.
So when I go and I'm using my AI to help me, I'm giving it my information and I'm saying, this is what I've created. What other ways can we simplify, or what ways can we, you're not, it's there to assist you, but not to teach you. You're not getting the information from it. Like now, when it comes to, for example, racial equity work, somebody might go like, oh, I really don't need to work with a racial equity coach or somebody to help me understand matters to do with race. I can simply go on to my AI tool and put what my business is, and it can spit out something that's inclusive. And so we really need to be intentional that how are we using it? Is it as a teacher or is it as a tool? Baseline when you begin to use, the tools, and also taking the time to go through it. Don't just take what it gives you as gospel. Take the time to audit, have your human filter go through it. And this is where also, how connected are you? Who are the people that you can ask around you? What do you think of this piece of information? And especially when it comes from an inclusivity perspective, you don't know how inclusive you are unless you're doing the work of being inclusive. Going back to what I said in the beginning, a lot of people think, oh, I'm already inclusive.
Yes.
But are you doing the work? Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And it is through doing the work that you're able to look at things, information, through a different lens. And so baseline, Sarah, that's where I would begin, because sometimes it can get so overwhelming for somebody listening and going like, oh my goodness, ethics committee, what are you talking about, Annie? I just want to add my chat GPT and just for it to give me the content for my socials for this week. What are you talking about? But this is just making you aware that the data, the information that you're receiving is not neutral. It is biased. And so how can you, once you have that awareness, how can you use it in a way that it will be more helpful to you, rather than you just taking everything it gives you and spitting it out?
I love that advice. And Annie, that's sage advice generally for using AI. I see a lot of people kind of almost absolving responsibility and using AI for that teaching tool. And one of the things that I say, which comes back more to ethics and authenticity, is when AI came out, my gosh, LinkedIn must have blown up with how much content people were putting out. LinkedIn articles are here, there, and everywhere. And you can immediately tell what was AI content. One of the things that was fascinating about it is that I believe if I've written a blog to tell you that I'm an expert in creating digital products, and you come and work with me based on the assumption that that blog has told you Sarah's an expert in digital products, I'm going to go work with her. If that was written by AI, what I'm actually doing is putting out information into the world that's false. And I kind of have a bit of an issue with that generally because people rely on your website, your information, your content to say, Annie is an expert in racial equity. Okay. And if you have not written that content and you haven't contributed to it, what you're actually doing is stealing someone's homework, in my opinion, because we're misleading people. And that's an even bigger issue than having biased information is misleading people. So I would encourage you all to think about how are you using AI, and if you are getting it to generate ideas and content. One of the things that I do a lot, because particularly because people rely on my information to be correct, is I ask AI, I say, if you've told me this, give me a source. And my AI is programmed to know that my sources are published journal articles. It is not Wikipedia. It is not the Trump. It is reliable data. And once you have that, then you can rely on your information. And I know, Annie, you very much run your business like this with data and credibility.
Absolutely. And even going a step further, because now with depending on what kind of tool that you're using, there is a way that you can personalize it and put information and say, when you create content for me, I want you to ensure that, either the sources you're using are diverse. I want to ensure that they're Black voices, they're Indigenous voices, they're voices from people of color, not just Eurocentric voices. You can make sure that, and for it to cite the sources, where did you get this information? And to be able just to, there's so many times I've gotten information, I've gone, that doesn't sound true. Where did you get this? Oh, sorry, Annie. That was miscommunication. Let me try that again. And so if you're not if you're not slowing down, you will find yourself having problems by putting out things that are not true.
And I want to kind of talk a little bit about Annie because I am definitely a business that sits in the happy naive space of believing that I am inclusive, because as a human being, I like to think that I am. But I probably haven't unpacked all of that. And so when you're talking about putting our human hat on, can you talk a little bit about I'd love you to talk about the course that you run because it's incredibly powerful. I've got women in my mastermind who have been through it, and I shamefully have not yet. But I'd love you to talk about that because I think many of us sit in that lens like I do of, I think I'm doing a good job. Okay. I think I'm a decent person. I don't think I'm a racist person. All of those kind of things, we sit in a little bit of comfort and maybe a little bit of smugness, but let's be honest, probably a whole lot of naivety. So can you talk to me about your course and why people like myself should be doing it? Because if we do it, I think it's going to help how we approach AI.
Absolutely. The course is really, it's a 10-week course that helps you understand the root of racism, why we are the way we are, so that we can then intentionally be inclusive. And a lot of times people are like, oh, Annie, this work of racism is for those who are racist. And it's not for somebody like me who's already inclusive. But the thing is, with racism, it makes you think that this is for the extremists, it's for who are, far right, neo Nazis, Nazis, and so on. But the thing is, there is something all of us, Black, brown, Indigenous, white people, that we are doing to perpetuate racism. We are doing to uphold white supremacy. And so when you begin to understand what racism is, and I think what has surprised me most as an educator in this space is that the people who come in thinking that racism is just something that is between a couple of people who don't like each other or use racial slurs, and they don't like this group of people, but they begin to understand it's a system we are all in and we're living through. And when they begin to see that and the ways in which they have been impacted by it without knowing, and the ways they have taken part without knowing, they're like, hang on, this is a system, Annie. And I'm like, yes, it is. It is the system now. So glad you can see that. It allows you then to do life so differently from a personal perspective as a parent, as a mother, father. It allows you just to show up differently. There's certain things that you see when you're invited to be part of a panel, when you're invited to be part of a summit, and you're like, hang on, who else is on that panel? We are a multicultural country here in Australia. Who else is going to be speaking? What other voices are we going to be hearing? Is it just going to be white women on the panel? And so it causes you to stop. I had a conversation last night with somebody who has been taken represent, and we are just talking about ways in which her life has really changed, and she was applying for jobs. And every time she applied for them, it was the process. It wasn't inclusive, and she was seeing so many loopholes, and she wanted to be part of a board. And she looked around, and the board was just white, and she's like, hang on, this doesn't make sense. For me, it doesn't align with my values. Whereas before that, she would have still just gone in, but she's questioning certain things now and making harder decisions. And I was like, oh my gosh, that must have been so hard for you to turn that down. She's like, no, 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 Annie. Once your eyes are open, it's not about it being hard. It just feels ick to go back there. It's like taking the Kool-Aid. And I was like, wow, because I was trying to sympathize with how hard it is. And she's like, no, I'm a different person. And so that's what it does for people. It makes you see and do life differently. And now in her business, how she's operating, being trauma informed, and how she holds space is so, so different than she had before. And even as she continues to do this work through reading books and continuing to educate herself, she said that Represented is, it just really allowed her to be able to now read other things and continue on her journey with a baseline understanding. Whereas if she didn't have that foundation through Represented, all the other things that she's reading, those recommended books, those podcasts, they wouldn't make as much sense. It would be information that just goes over her. But now she's like, oh, that makes so much sense. And a final thing I will add, Sarah, about Represented is the ability to come and not be judged. The ability to make mistakes and say, I messed up, or I did this, or in our family, we've historically done things this way. And it is okay to make mistakes, provided that when you know better, you do better. And I think that is what people come in and are so surprised to be held with so much grace, so much compassion and love in order to stay and do the work. And that's what makes it different. It's not a space where you're coming and being told, oh, you did this wrong, or you're being called out. It's actually a space where you're being called in and asked to rise to a higher level, where you are being the best version of yourself by being as inclusive as you can.
Goodness. If you all don't have goosebumps from hearing that, I'm not sure what you need, because we are all being called in, and I hope that you feel that this is really important for us as business owners to do. So thank you, Annie, for generously sharing about your course. And just as a final footnote before we wrap up, Annie also has a masterclass, the link of which will be in the show notes. And she's created a masterclass on, actually, I'll let you talk with this guy about Annie, because I'll probably say it incorrectly.
I created a masterclass, and this one is free, where I teach you how to create an inclusive strategy for your coaching business. How can you be more inclusive when it comes to using AI tools? So I give you a little bit of a history lesson of what AI is, where it emerged from, who the creators were, the fathers of AI, so to speak, and then take you on a journey, particularly when you look at your business and your framework from your messaging, from creating that lead magnet, and who is that lead magnet for, all the way to your offboarding when you say goodbye to your client and they're like, no, 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 I don't want to say goodbye, I want to come back. how can you be inclusive step by step using those AI tools to help you and do it in a more inclusive way. So that's there. And there's a free AI bias guide. If you just want to know how are we being biased, what are the ways in which as a coach or a course creator am I being biased, there's an AI guide that is free that walks you through the steps as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Annie. So for all of the listeners, the links for all of those will be in the show notes. So make sure you go and check out those. And I think, I'm going to wrap up now because Annie, you've expressed everything so beautifully and succinctly, and you have shared so generously your knowledge. I am so grateful to have you back on my podcast. From myself and all my listeners, thank you so much for coming along and sharing all your knowledge. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
And to all my lovely listeners, I will catch you the same time next week on The Social Circus. Thanks so much for tuning in to The Social Circus. As your host, Sarah Thompson, I am thrilled that you've chosen to spend your time hanging out with me. I would be so grateful if you could spare an extra moment to go and leave me a review on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you even felt more excited, you could share my podcast with your friends who you think would get great value from it. Thanks so much again for tuning in.